What is up, guys? So this is going to be my review for The Flash, Season 4, Episode 15, titled Enter Flashtime, and I'm actually pretty excited to review this episode because it was by far the best episode of Season 4 and possibly the best episode of the show ever. It was just so good. The reason it was so good falls onto a lot of things. The performances from the actors, the concept of the show, of the episode was great. It was a very cinematic episode, and a big part of why this episode was so great is because it was probably the most flashy Flash episode ever. And I don't mean because of the colors, because it was really well lit. The colors in this episode were breathtakingly beautiful, like the lightning following Barry to the nuclear bomb. It was a sight to see. But that's not what I mean by flashy. I mean it was really comic booky Flash, and it's really similar to season 4, the end of season 4 not in this show, but in Justice League, when the Flash went all out with his powers and annihilated Brainiac and Lex Luthor. This episode felt like that, not because he did the same thing, but because it felt so powerful. It made Flash look so powerful, and it used his superpowers in such a creative way, just like that one. And this is even more creative. That was just running around the world, and it was an amazing scene to see. But this, I think, is better because it's just so creative. The way they used his powers in this episode is nothing like I've ever seen before, and it is incredible. This is why I love the Flash so much. This is why he is my favorite comic book character. He wasn't my favorite superhero in the Arrowverse until this episode, and now he is. This is why I love the Flash. The way they used his superpowers in this episode, along with Jay Garrick and Jesse Quick, but to a lesser extent. It was so cool to see. What I'm talking about when I say I love how they used the Flash's powers in this episode is specifically Flashtime. Flashtime itself is not a new concept. Slowing down time or even stopping time using speed or going fast, so fast that it looks like that everything is slowing down isn't new. It's not even new to the show. In fact, I think it showed up in the first episode ever, but they never used it to this scale. They never used it for 30 minutes at a time. They never used it for this long, and they never used it in this way where they completely stopped time to the point where a nuclear bomb takes like 10 minutes to get from stage 1, 2 to 3. I don't even know how that works, but I mean they're going really, really fast, and the world is going really, really slow, where like 30 minutes is less than a second. So they took it to a whole nother level, and it really worked. It was such a cool sight to see. The entire episode they were coming up with ways to stop the bomb, and they basically touched on every single way that I could think of, and then they brought a new one. Like, the only ones I could think of is that they time travel back in time in order to stop it, which Barry is reluctant to do. He says no, he will not do it because he knows the consequences of Flashpoint. So he doesn't want to do that. He probably thinks that if he stops the bomb, another bomb will go off because time always corrects itself. So that makes sense. And another thing I would think of is that he runs it out of the city, but he mentioned that if he does that, the nuke would blow up before he gets out, which also made sense. And that's all I was able to think of. But they also came up with throwing it into the Speed Force, which Jay Garrick said no to, because that would that would take away the speed from every speedster in the multiverse and throughout time, so that's a no. And then they came up with throwing lightning at it, which they were going in order to fuse the atoms and before they explode, and they were going to do that, but Jay Garrick was too weak, and that actually led to the way they actually took out the nuke, which was running into the Speed Force, getting that device that Cisco made in order to trick the Speed Force into thinking that Barry was in there, and then run towards the nuke with the lightning storm following Barry at the nuke, and that was brilliant. There was no way I was able to think of that. The writers must have thought, what is a way we could think of to get rid of this nuke at like an out-of-the-box way without making it too simple, and they really did it really well. Not only that, though, the visuals of him running to the Speed Force, getting that device, and the lightning chasing him, it looked amazing. And the fact that Iris was the one to come up with the idea didn't actually bother me at all, because the moment where Barry went to talk to Iris felt like the climax of the story. It was right when Barry was about to give up. let the city explode because there's nothing he can do. So he went to say his goodbyes to Iris, and it just felt so right for Iris to come up with the plan in order to stop this nuke. And if she didn't come up with it, it probably would have been disappointing in terms of storytelling purposes. It felt so right. You can say that they didn't really need to have Iris do that. They could have had Barry go talk to someone else. But in terms of storytelling purpose, in terms of the story, the only character it made sense for him to talk to at that point was Iris, because he was about to give up and he wanted to say goodbye, and the character that he probably wants to say goodbye to the most was Iris, because they are married. So in terms of the story, it made sense, which is why it's not disappointing at all that Iris came up with it despite the fact that she is nowhere near as smart as anyone else, especially Cisco and Harry and maybe even Jay in terms of the Speed Force. So that's why Iris coming up with the idea did not bother me. Also, I totally forgot about it. Like, it didn't bother me at all that she came up with it, but just seeing what happened right after she did, it doesn't really matter in the slightest because it was just so amazing. Another thing I loved about this episode was Grant Gustin's performance. He carried this episode and he did it so well. I think he was like in 90 to 95% of the scenes. The scenes he wasn't in was the Cliffhanger Dawn Allen scene at the end, and also the Jesse Harry talking scenes, which like was 2 or 3 scenes. So he was in almost every scene. So he needed to pull off a pretty good performance in order to carry the episode, and he pulled off one of, if not the best performance he's ever had. And I'm reluctantly saying if not, because it's probably not the best. He's had some pretty great episodes, but the fact that this was 30 minutes of just him, and he was great in every single minute of it. This is probably his best episode ever because of it. There is no scene in this episode that is his best best scene, but it all together, 30 minutes of just him knocking out of the park in every scene means that this is probably his best episode ever. This episode felt and also looked like a theatrically released movie. It looked and also felt amazing. The premise of the episode could have been a movie, despite the fact that there really wasn't a main villain. I mean, there was Veronica Dale, there was Hyrax, which everyone expected that to be Hyrax, and we were right. And she was there, but I mean, she was there for literally a minute, and then the rest of the episode, which was technically less than a second, the rest of the Flashtime part of the episode. But despite that, it felt like it could have been a movie, and it would have been a great movie. Just slap on another hour of setup with Hyrax setting up the Eden Corp, setting up their motivation and why they want to blow up the city, and then start that, and then like after that you have this episode, and that's a movie. It could have been a movie, and it felt like, and also looked like a movie. It looked amazing. The CGI in this episode was for the most part great. Like when Barry was running into and out of the Speed Force with the lightning, that looked so good. It looked like it could have been in a movie, and the colors they had with the lightning just made the episode pop, and it made it look so great. There's really nothing I can talk about in this episode that was bad. It just felt like a movie, and if it was a movie, it would have probably been a great movie and a lot better than anything they're making right now with the Flashpoint movie. I'm betting, even though this episode didn't really have any consequence to it, even though it was technically a filler. I mean, nothing really happened. I mean nothing of consequence happened. Nothing happened to push the story along. The only things that happened were that Jay Garrick decided to retire, but he was deciding to retire anyway, and then also Jesse Quick and Harry put away their differences and talked or read each other's mind, which again could have happened in a different episode, Subplot. And there was also Caitlin and Dawn Allen, which that's really it. The main storyline of this episode didn't really affect the episode at all, but in spite of that, it was still amazing, and I'm definitely not going to lower the score because of it, like I did from Midvale on Supergirl. The reason I did that there is because, first of all, literally nothing happened to advance the story of the season, but also because it wasn't that great. It was a good episode, but if a filler episode like this one isn't amazing, then really what was the point? So with this filler episode being amazing, there was a point to it to give us an entertaining and great episode in Enter Flashtime, and I guess it did flesh out his powers in some way, but I mean, DeVoe didn't show up, nothing, even Ralph didn't show up, nothing showed up, nothing happened to advance the story of the season, which in this case, usually that's a complaint, but in this case it's not, because the episode was just so good that it didn't really need anything else. It didn't need to further the story of the season because it was so good it stood on its own, which is why I'm saying that it could have been a movie. Like if The Flash had a spin-off movie that they released, this Enter Flashtime could have been that, and I would have loved it as a movie. And then there was the scene at the end, which was the cliffhanger scene with Dawn Allen, or seemingly Dawn Allen. In this episode, this scene here, I don't think really needed to be in this specific episode. I think it was tacked on, which is really my only singular gripe with this episode, and it's really kind of nitpicking, to be honest, but I didn't really think this scene needed to be in the episode. I think it should have ended with Harry and Jesse thinking to each other, or however that ended. That way, that would have been a much better ending to the episode, but that's really my only gripe with the episode, and it is also nitpicking. And in spite of the fact that it did feel a little tacked on, this was actually a really cool scene. It furthered the mystery of who this woman is. Is she Dawn Allen? I mean, we do know from this episode, from this scene, that she's interested in Team Flash. At least, I mean, we know that. We also know that she's connected to Iris and Barry somehow. So, I mean, she's got to be Dawn Allen. She knows Caitlin and Harry are somehow connected to the Flash, so she's probably from the future. So I just like how this scene furthered the mystery of who she is, because every season had a mystery with their main villain except for this one, and season 2 also had the mystery with who was in the Iron Mask, which turned out to be Jay Garrick. And the only mystery in this season, as far as I can tell, is who is this woman who is seemingly Dawn Allen. So I really like the fact that they furthered the mystery in this scene. I would have rather it happened in the next episode, but again, that is kind of nitpicking. One last thing is to touch on is the fact that this episode only had like one subplot, which is the Jesse and Harry subplot, which was actually surprisingly good and heartfelt and emotional. It was actually done really, really well. But the fact that it only had one subplot, and that subplot actually came out of the Flashtime main storyline anyway, the fact that it only had one subplot really made it feel more like a movie than usual. Like I said, it felt like a movie, and this is another thing that made it feel like it, that there was only one subplot, and that was connected to the main plot and came out of it. So it felt like that it had this one story it was trying to tell, and it told the story, and it was done at the end, and it really benefited because of it. It was so good because there was only one subplot, and that subplot was barely even a subplot. In conclusion, this was by far the best episode of Season 4 and possibly the best of the show ever. I loved how they used his powers in this episode. It felt like such a comic booky, flashy episode, and it showed me why I love this character so much. It also, because of this episode, the Flash became my favorite character in the Arrowverse, passing over Green Arrow. Grant Gustin's performance in this episode was amazing. The execution and also concept of Flashpoint was also really cool. Visually, this episode was breathtaking. Jay Garrick and Jesse Quick being in the episode was cool as well, and the way they stopped the bomb was really thinking out of the box, and it looked so good. The fact that this episode only had one subplot made it feel more like a movie as well as everything. It looked like a movie. The premise felt like a movie. This could have been a movie, and it would have probably been the best DC movie ever, because I'm not really a huge fan of any of the DC movies. Like, they've never made a movie that I loved, including the Dark Knight trilogy. So if this was a movie, this would have probably been the best one ever. So I'll actually give this episode, for the first time ever, for the first time since I started reviewing the Arrowverse episodes, I'll give it an episode a 10 out of 10. But let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.